Welcome. I'm Deanna Cohen, CEO and co-founder of Plastic Pollution Coalition. I'd like to thank you for joining our April webinar, Greenwashing, Debunking the Plastic Industry's False Narrative. Plastic Pollution Coalition is a nonprofit communications and advocacy organization that collaborates with an expansive global alliance of organizations, businesses, and individuals to create a more just, equitable, and regenerative world free of plastic pollution and its toxic impacts. Okay, let's get started. We have 4 poll questions today to get a sense of who is joining us. Each question will only appear for 20 seconds, so please answer quickly. Poll question number 1. Where are you joining us from? Please select 1. Well, that's a long 20 seconds. I don't know if we've ended it yet, but it looks like folks are tuning in from Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands, as well as the Caribbean, Central and South America, Europe, and North Asia, and the Middle East, and with about a 90% majority coming from North America and Canada. Probably has to do with the timing, so thank you. Let's move on to poll question number 2. What best describes the sector in which you work? This is a single choice, so please just click 1. Okay, well, it looks like we've got folks online from corporations and business, education, academia, as well as education, academia, students and administration, government and policy, the media, nonprofits and NGOs, as well as research and other. I'd love to know what other is. Let's move to the next poll question. On a scale of 1 to 3, how familiar are you with the concept of greenwashing? Please just pick a single choice. Well, it looks like almost 50% of everyone tuning in is very familiar with greenwashing. About 38% are somewhat familiar and 13% are not familiar at all. So I look forward to learning today with you more about it. Thank you. Let's move on to poll question number 4. This is our final poll question. Which greenwashed product labels or marketing have you encountered in the past month? Please select all that apply. Well, it looks like about 87% of us have experienced made from recycled plastic, but more than 55% made from plastic bottles, as well as made from ocean plastic, made from a certain percentage less plastic. Almost 80% have experienced the expression biodegradable, the term biodegradable, eco-friendly, and as well as 38% carbon neutral. So thank you for participating in our poll and our poll questions. We appreciate that. It helps give our panelists an idea of who is here today. And today we're going to hear from George Harding-Rolls, campaign manager for Changing Markets Foundation, Shimona Mujumdar, executive director for Earth Island Institute, and Emma Priestlin, global corporate campaigns coordinator for Break Free from Plastic. But first, it's my great pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Shilpi Chotre. Shilpi is a globally recognized communicator and thought leader on the plastic pollution crisis with an expertise in intersectionality and narrative change. Shilpi is the co-founder and executive director of People Over Plastic, an environmental justice media platform, and host of the People Over Plastic podcast series. She is the former global communications lead at Break Free from Plastic, and prior to that was a marine science and conservation policy researcher. Welcome, Shilpi.
Thank you so much, Deanna. Hi, everybody. Thanks again to Deanna and the PPC team for organizing another timely webinar. It's wonderful to be here today with Earth Day right around the corner. I hope you're getting to enjoy Mother Nature this week and get to spend time outside with your loved ones. So this topic of greenwashing is an important one in the general environmental movement, but especially true when it comes to plastic pollution and the corporate sector, which will be a big focus for today. When we talk about greenwashing, there's a lot of different definitions out there. I like this simple quote from Changing Markets that we'll get to meet George in a little bit. It simply states it's the practice of falsifying or overstating the green credentials of a product. We see this time and time again with plastic packaging in particular, where corporate commitments are aimed at better recycling versus reducing overall plastic production. And when I say plastic production, we're talking about both the fast-moving consumer goods sector, the Pepsis, the Nestle's, the Unilevers, but also the petrochemical sector, which creates these products in the first place. And we're seeing greenwashing from all of these industries. 99% of plastic comes from an oil and gas-based resource, and that is a fact. So we need to be considering the upstream impacts and looking at plastics as a life cycle issue. In addition to frontline community health impacts from industrial pollution, we're ingesting a credit card's worth of microplastics every week. So I want to remind everyone what we're dealing with is a massive human health issue. I pulled some examples calling out greenwashing in the media. To celebrate some of the positive progress we've made. It's great to see this type of coverage because the industry have literally spent billions on ads since the 80s to confuse the public and policymakers about the climate crisis and its solutions. And this also includes the plastics crisis. There's a fantastic article that came out in The Hill, I believe it was yesterday, that talks about petrochemicals and plastics being the Biden administration's climate blind spot. So the petrochemical build out, and to put this into perspective, in the US Gulf South alone, equates to more than 8% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. As Deanna mentioned, I'm the co-founder of People Over Plastic. We're an environmental justice media platform, cutting through the noise and sharing stories from the front lines of the plastic pollution, climate crisis, and also other intersectional issues. One of the stories we covered on the podcast also takes an investigative look at what's happening in South Baltimore, where incineration or burning plastic is categorized as a renewable energy source, meaning the same as wind and solar. So this is a pretty toxic form of greenwashing, where not only the industry is complicit, but so is the local and federal government. And just to end on a positive note, we hired our first staff reporter in the Gulf South. So you can expect some really important and engaging content coming out on plastic, climate, and the human health intersection. So let's get to it with our wonderful panelists today. Very excited to kick off with my dear colleague, Emma Priestland from Break Free from Plastic. Emma leads the Break Free corporate campaigning coordination team and has advocated for an end to plastic pollution for over 10 years. Emma was a founding member of the Rethink Plastic Alliance, which was instrumental in achieving ambitious European legislation to reduce plastic bags and the Single-Use Plastic Directive. So take it away, Emma.
Thank you so much, Shilpi, and thank you so much to the Plastic Pollution Coalition for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure to speak to you all today. Okay, so just to tell you a little bit about Break Free from Plastic movement to start off with, we are a global movement of organizations that have the vision of ending plastic pollution. And we don't just mean plastic pollution in the ocean, we're talking about plastic pollution from the entire life cycle of plastic. We currently have over 400 core member organizations as part of our movement, and we're in 186 countries. And this is just a quick representation for you of what the plastic pollution life cycle looks like. All right, so really, why do we care if companies are greenwashing? First of all, about 44% of plastic is used for packaging. And this is packaging that is mostly used once for food and consumer goods. These are the kind of products that we have around our house in our daily life. And it's mostly companies that we're all extremely familiar with. All the food companies, Coca-Cola, Nestle, Unilever, Procter & Gamble. They are really producing the majority of plastic waste that we're dealing with. And plastic production is set to double by 2040. Now, in the US, you're currently the #1 per capita user of plastic. These companies have the goal to have the rest of the world using plastic packaging in the same way that people in the United States and Europe does. That means more plastic waste, more pollution across the whole life cycle. Now, the companies that we're looking at here today really claim to care about their pollution impact. They're making endless statements about tackling plastic pollution. They have all sorts of different projects on the go, but actually we're finding that most of these companies are actually increasing the amount of plastic they're using every year. So why can't we just recycle all the plastic that we're using, and why can't we clean up the pollution that's already in the environment? Well, in the United States, the current recycling rate is about 5% of plastic that's used last year. It's completely unfeasible to imagine that we could increase our recycling capacity to go from 5% recycling to recycle everything. And then how can we possibly clean up plastic in the environment when we're not able to turn off the tap of the amount of plastic that is going in? If we were to start cleaning up, it's just going to be a never-ending project. But we also have to remember that plastic pollution is not just about the visible plastic that we can see with our eyes and what's ending up in the ocean. Not only is plastic polluting our bodies, our atmosphere, our oceans, and our environment, it is also trashing our climate. If the plastic life cycle were a country, it would be the world's 5th largest emitter. And this is really why we need to see companies reducing the amount of plastic that they are using. We can't just have claims about recyclability or any of the other greenwashing things that they are promoting. We have to see companies changing how they deliver their products to the customers so they're no longer reliant on single-use plastic. All right, so how do we hold companies accountable and to try to undermine the greenwashing efforts that they make? Well, the Break Free from Plastic movement has an amazing citizen science project called brand audits. And a brand audit is our way of gathering evidence to hold those companies accountable for their role in the plastic pollution crisis. The only way to really combat that plastic pollution is to stop it at source. And to do that, we need to know what that source is. Who are the companies that are making this plastic? And what does a brand audit look like in practice? Well, we have thousands of volunteers around the world who go out into their communities. They're collecting plastic waste from the communities and the environment, and then they're sorting it to find out what the brands are on that waste. We have an amazing group of volunteers all around the world, and we have been doing this project now for 5 years. All right, so in those 5 years of conducting brand audits, we've held over 2,000 individual brand audit events. We've engaged with over 200,000 volunteers in 87 countries. And most importantly, we've audited over 2 million pieces of plastic waste during that time. We've just recently released our 5-year brand audit report that analyzes all the data together, and you can find that linked in these slides. All right, so what does all this data show us? Well, it allows us to see who the world's top plastic polluters actually are. And really no surprises here. The world's top plastic polluters are Coca-Cola Company, PepsiCo, Nestle, Unilever, Mondelez. And here you can see a rough outline of the amount of pieces of plastic we found and in how many countries. We've been calling out these same companies for years now. They have been called the top plastic polluter in the world's major media publications, in Emmy award-winning documentaries. They're getting attention from policymakers, from their own consumers, constantly demanding that they take action on plastic pollution. So how do these companies actually respond to all of this pressure that they have been receiving for years now? Well, frankly, they respond with greenwashing and false solutions. It's important to remember that companies are responsible to their owners and to their shareholders. Their primary objective is maintaining and increasing their profit margin. So when we are demanding that they change their business model to stop relying on single-use plastic that is polluting our world in so many different ways, they're actually trying to avoid doing that at all costs. So they distract us with different projects, with fancy new technologies, with different kinds of advocacy and lobbying methods. And this is where the greenwashing and false solutions comes in. So back in 2021, Break Free from Plastic movement released a report really tracking corporates and how they are relying on false solutions to the plastic pollution crisis. Between the years of 2018 and 2021, we searched for all of the so-called plastic pollution solution projects that 7 of our top polluting companies were promoting and publicly communicating about. This allowed us to classify and to track exactly what they're doing. Some of the different projects that we found range from really the misguided to extremely damaging. Things like beach cleans, but classified as a solution to the pollution problem. Novel types of packaging, such as plant-based plastic bottles or products made out of ocean plastic. We found a huge amount of plastic offsetting projects and companies claiming that they are plastic neutral because they have paid some people in the other side of the world to collect waste to so-called offset their own usage. We see an enormous increase in unfeasible, unproven, and damaging projects such as chemical recycling. We also see a lot of companies actually paying to burn plastic in cement kilns, which has a really serious air pollution and climate consequences, also is extremely damaging to communities that live around those cement kilns. And we found very few projects that these companies were promoting that would actually result in a reduction in plastic use or change the single-use plastic system. So during that time period we were looking at, we found about 214 projects from those 7 companies. And this is definitely an undercount because we were relying on publicly available information. We found 176 of those projects were clearly false solutions. Some of them were simply press releases and then no further evidence that anything was going on after that. A lot of them were false narratives, lots of false technologies, and a lot of things that relied on other people collecting waste from the environment. Only 38 of those projects were actually focused on developing reusable reusable packaging or alternative ways of delivering products to people. And out of those 38, 25 of those were actually pilot projects. And these were tiny things. For example, a reuse system set up in one shop, in one mall, in one city in Indonesia with no follow-through plans. To me, this looks like a PR project. Okay, so finally, just to wrap up for you, how do companies get us to really believe they're greenwashing? They use a lot of misleading terminology. Things like advanced recycling, which sounds really exciting, but is really not much more than burning plastic. They classify plastic waste as a renewable energy source. They talk about ocean-bound plastic. They also do a lot of hijacking of concepts and changing the definitions of things. For example, circular economy. In many circles, this now actually includes burning plastic. They also talk about plastic as a renewable feedstock, as I mentioned. They talk about bioplastics as renewable plastics. Everything is getting twisted in the corporate language. We also see things being called a solution or green or climate friendly, even though that's based on absolutely no evidence, or they're basing it on studies that they themselves have funded. And we also see a lot of flashy media announcements on a new project that will be picked up in publications around the world just based off a press release. And then when you look into it, nothing has actually happened. So to finish, I mean, that's me done. I'm excited to hear from the rest of the speakers, and I'm excited to hear your questions.
Thank you so much, Emma. It's really amazing to see the progress with 5 years of data, and I'm really proud of the movement for all this work. We are getting some questions about how we hold companies accountable in the court of law. So I'm really excited to introduce you to Sumona Majumdar. She recently became the executive director of Earth Island Institute. Congrats, Sumona. of which Plastic Pollution Coalition is a project. She previously served as Earth Island's general counsel, where she led high-profile cases against plastic polluters, corporate greenwashing, and regulatory agencies. So we're really excited to hear from her directly. Take it away.
Hi, thank you, Shilpi, and thank you, Emma, for the overview of the brand audits and your efforts to identify the corporations that are causing this mess, so that we can hold them accountable through legal efforts. I'm going to do a quick run through around these efforts that we've initiated to hold companies accountable for their greenwashing. First, though, I'd like to set the stage a little bit. The greenwashing that we see now is actually part of a decades-long misinformation and reframing campaign that places the blame on individuals for the harms from plastic instead of the companies that are creating and using plastic to begin with. Starting as early as the 1950s, when plastic use for consumer goods really started to take off, companies along the entire life cycle of plastics and their related trade associations began to heavily promote the concepts of individual responsibility and recycling as a solution to the plastic crisis. Some of the representative ads from this campaign include the 1971 Crying Indian ad, where an actor posed as a Native American and was canoeing through a polluted river and exclaims that people start pollution and people can stop it. There's also a 2013 ad where the I Want to Be Recycled ad, where a lonely water bottle is rolling through different landscapes and communities until someone picks it up and puts it in a recycling bin. There are countless examples of ads like this, including from other areas, that other corporations that create harmful and dangerous products, but want to convince us that really it's our responsibility. And some examples in other contexts are guns don't kill people, people kill people. In the auto industry, they've long deflected the blame for the dangers of cars by blaming pedestrians and pushing for jaywalking laws. We see similar tactics in big tobacco and in big pharma. So really, the plastic industry finds itself in some very good company. Even more recently, you are seeing various companies touting false solutions in their continued efforts to convince us of their commitments to sustainability. Pepsi announced a plan to cut their virgin plastic per serving. Coke launched 100% recyclable content bottle. But at the same time, these companies are using millions of metric tons of plastic annually and have made promises like this before and repeatedly broken them. In addition to that, we are also seeing a whole new set of false solutions emerging. These are referred to as plastic to fuel, waste to energy, chemical recycling, and advanced recycling, when each of these, in fact, is really just some form of burning plastic that is a toxic transfer of the pollutants in that plastic to our air, water, soil, and bodies. Here you can see a slide that shows the promises made by 10 corporations against their actual results. This was made by Beyond Plastics. And I think you can see that really the only thing that's being recycled are the promises. Behind the scenes, these same companies are actively thwarting efforts that would result in improved recycling rates and reductions in plastic use, presumably because plastic is cheap for these companies to use, and they are not really interested in paying for the costs of recycling it, nor are they interested in being forced to reduce plastic. So in response to the misinformation campaign, we have initiated several lawsuits to call out the greenwashing and raise awareness of how these companies contribute to the plastic crises, and the work done by both Break Free from Plastic and Changing Markets Foundation has been critical to helping us build our cases. The brand audits provide tangible evidence that we cite to in our complaints of how these companies contribute to the plastic pollution problem and how they fail to live up to their promises. And the detailed tracking of these promises against the results that's done by the Changing Markets Foundation has also been really critical in demonstrating that these claims are in fact misleading. So in February of 2020, we filed a lawsuit against 10 major food, beverage, and consumer goods companies alleging that they spread misinformation about the recyclability of plastic packaging and for polluting California's waterways and coasts with their plastic packaging. We survived an initial effort to move the case to federal court, and we also survived a challenge to personal jurisdiction to be able to sue these companies in California. But we are now facing a motion to dismiss, and that hearing is scheduled for May 10th. So more to come. In August of 2021, we filed a lawsuit against Blue Triton Brands. They own what was formerly Nestle Waters North America's portfolio. So this is Poland Spring, Pure Life, Splash, Ozarka, Arrowhead, a bunch of other brands, which constitute about a third of the US bottled water market, and they're estimated to contribute hundreds of millions of pounds of plastic to US landfills annually. We called out a number of their statements as false and misleading, and in response, Blue Triton defended its self-promotion by explaining that many of their statements are actually non-actionable puffery, which really means to say that it's meaningless and it's nonsense and nobody should believe us. So I'll walk through a couple of those statements, and you'll probably agree that it is a bunch of nonsense, but that it is also misleading. So here, these are captures from our complaint, but here you can see in sort of the top half, something we pulled from their social media where they claim that they're a guardian of sustainable resources. In this section of the complaint, we call out the fact that Blue Triton repeatedly talks about that their bottles are made from #1 PET plastic, which can, according to them, be recycled over and over and over again, lending to this idea that you can just keep creating a new bottle, which is in fact false. Here they talk about the fact that they are keeping bottles out of landfills when in fact they are contributing hundreds of millions of pounds of plastic to landfills annually in the US, and that they are creating a circular economy. And again, we are calling out the fact that they keep referencing that they're keeping bottles out of landfills. 2021, we also filed a lawsuit against Coca-Cola, again for false and deceptive advertising. Here we were specifically calling out the fact that Coca-Cola advertises itself as a sustainable and environmentally friendly company, when in fact it's the largest plastic polluter in the world. They generate 2.9 million metric tons of plastic every single year. This case was unfortunately dismissed at the trial court level. However, we have appealed it, and the DC Solicitor General actually filed an amicus in support of our appeal because they felt that the trial court gave an overly narrow view of consumer protection laws. So we're feeling confident, and again, more to come. Here are some of the examples of the claims that we called out. Coca-Cola and their World Without Waste campaign, where they talk about collecting and recycling a bottle for every one they produce. They produce 200,000 bottles per minute. So again, just completely impossible to do. Again, calling out their statements that they're committed to getting every bottle back, continuing along with the every bottle back statements, and a recycling of their promise of a commitment to up their recycled content in their bottles. Back in 1990, they made a commitment to get their bottles up to 25% recycled content. They never got close, and now they're upping that to 50% recycled content by 2030. Here's a list of some of the other lawsuits around greenwashing, but you can find an extensive list at the litigation tracker, plastics litigation tracker out of NYU Law School. Smith versus Keurig was around the recyclability of the pods. The last beach cleanup lawsuit was around the transparency of the TerraCycle recycling programs and some of the companies that rely on it and the statements they make as a result. And the Sierra Club lawsuit was related to the Coke's 100% recyclable claim around its plastic bottle. Additionally, the California Attorney General launched an investigation into ExxonMobil for its role in the misinformation campaign. And finally, I wanted to note that an important piece in all of our cases, and really all greenwashing cases here in the US is how companies are allowed to use various terms in their promotion. And here in the United States, this is framed in many ways around the green guides, which are developed by the Federal Trade Commission, and they play a really critical role in the regulation of environmental marketing claims. Although the green guides themselves are not directly enforceable by the FTC, they have been adopted by many states, and they form the standards under our consumer protection laws. So for example, under the green guides, a company can claim that a product is recyclable if consumers have sufficient access to recycling facilities, regardless of whether those products received at the facilities are actually getting recycled. This is a huge loophole and has been cited by judges as a basis for dismissing cases about the recyclability of products. But in good news, the FTC is in the process of updating the green guides and is currently accepting comments until April 24th. And they are specifically interested in the definitions of recyclable and recyclable content, among other things. And so hopefully we'll soon have better definitions, as well as direct enforcement by the FTC that will better hold corporations accountable for truth in advertising. So thanks. And I just wanted to quickly note that if you do want to receive updates about our lawsuits or the work of any of our fiscally sponsored projects, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, which is called Island Wire, and that's available on our website under the Take Action tab at earthisland.org.
Thank you so much, Simona. So last but not least, we have George Harding-Rolls. George is the campaign manager at the Changing Markets Foundation. It's a Dutch-based nonprofit. Much of their work involves exposing irresponsible corporate behavior. He leads the organization's circular economy campaigns covering plastics and fashion, and their latest project, greenwash.com. So welcome, George.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, thanks for sticking with us. I promise not to be too long so that we can all get to the Q&A, because I've seen there's quite a few questions there. So yeah, thanks Shilpi for the introduction. Don't need to go into that too much more, but yeah, I've been working at Changing Markets for about 4 or 5 years with all these fine people, fine folk from across the plastic coalition of organizations working to hold the industry accountable for their pollution. So a little bit more about us as an organization. Our approach is based on these 2 key ideas to engender market shifts, that we have this urgent set of challenges, urgent challenge around climate crisis or plastic pollution or fast fashion, whichever area you're looking at. But most of the solutions actually already exist, but they're not favored by the market as it stands. So the way we work is to try and engender these rapid shifts, but to create self-reinforcing change. And most of the work that we do in that is through corporate accountability. So we run very hard-hitting campaigns to expose corporate responsibility in the sector. Shimona was alluding to our work against Coca-Cola to really expose their trail of broken promises around plastic, but also the top 10 big plastic polluters, which we've gone up against for the last couple of years. So the 2 campaigns that we work on that relate directly to greenwashing, or that I've worked on directly within greenwashing, are called Talking Trash and Fossil Fashion. So Talking Trash was an enormous investigative report we wrote back in 2019, 2020, which looked at how the top 10 plastic polluters that Emma mentioned at the beginning, how they behave. We looked at 12 different countries, how they behave when they come up against regulation that is actually a systemic solution to plastic pollution. So a good example is a bottle bill that you have in the US, or deposit return systems, as they're called in other parts of the world, or plastic bag bans, things like that. How do these guys who are saying in their greenwashed marketing that they're very much to get, every bottle back, a world without waste, all these very sort of open-ended phrases, what do they do when push comes to shove? And actually they need to come out either in favor or against something that's really going to change the system. And long story short, they will fight tooth and nail to make sure that kind of regulation does not get put into force. They will employ a variety of tactics that we call delay, distract, derail. I mean, I won't go into them too much. They're all in the report. But a lot of that is around greenwashing, or really kind of falls under the umbrella of greenwashing. So not only misleading consumers about what their products, the impact of their products, but also critically misleading policymakers, so that regulation actually is undermined. And then the next campaign, which is directly related, is called Fossil Fashion. So a huge, as Emma alluded to earlier, industry statistics suggest that 44% of plastics is packaging. Also, a huge amount of plastics is going into synthetic fibers, such as polyester. So of total fiber production across the board, 69% is actually synthetic, and the lion's share of that is polyester. So there's a huge source of plastic pollution coming from the clothes that we wear and the synthetic articles around our houses and our lives. And this is where the kind of worlds of plastic, of talking trash and fossil fashion came in together around greenwashing. So looking at the world of plastic clothing and the green claims that fashion brands were making, we actually found that 59% of all green claims that fashion brands were making were unsubstantiated or misleading, according to the UK's Competition and Markets Authority Green Claims Guide. And that sent us on this huge rabbit warren of work on greenwashing. So we built this project called greenwash.com in early 2022 in response to all these amazing examples, all these terrible examples of greenwashing that we'd found in the fashion industry. Won't dwell on this. Launched it outside London Fashion Week with me dressed as a washing machine, possibly the best and worst day of my career. It was hugely embarrassing, but we got a really good photo call and lots of media coverage of greenwashing, and lots of kind of cut through that this is an issue that really needs to be tackled. So yeah, this was great. Shilpi used this definition at the beginning, but this is our definition of greenwashing. And I think it's really important that we kind of understand why greenwashing is something that we need to fight against. So the practice of falsifying or overstating the green credentials of a product, service, or brand. And I think that, to Shimona's point, that is really critical that we talk about it in terms of brands greenwashing their entire existence, because some of those cases have been thrown out because it's seen as like not specifically relating to products or services, but the brand in its entirety. And that is very much a part of greenwashing, because consumers can be misled into buying products from a brand because they believe that the whole company is on a kind of sustainable mission. So here are my kind of three things that I use, or I'd probably say these three things about 3 times a week, maybe, talking about greenwashing as to why we need to push back against it so heavily. So the first and most obvious is that it misleads consumers. So when we're talking about the plastics industry, and you see that bottle that says it's made out of recycled plastic, you see that soft packaging that your vegetables come in, saying if you return it to the store, then they'll recycle that for you, that it's made out of plant-based materials, etc., etc. You're all familiar with that, but it misleads us into making purchases or making decisions that we may not have did it not have those green credentials attached. Secondly, it's actually uncompetitive business practice. So if you have one business that is doing all it can to substantiate its green claims, and another one that is just greenwashing, the one that is doing the work in substantiating is operating in an uncompetitive market. So actually, we're trying to protect the businesses that are doing the right thing against the big behemoths. Often it's the bigger ones who are just greenwashing with impunity. And then the third one, the placebo effect, I think this is actually the most important one, and is the kind of overriding principle of why greenwashing is critical to fight against. In a market that is saturated with greenwash, we can be led into the false sense of security that we're actually creating change, that we're actually heading in the right direction, because a lot of the companies that we're buying products from, that we're traveling with, that we're putting our pensions with, that we're, I don't know, well, I don't know, those are good examples, but pretty much every company, pretty much every sector is operating in some level of greenwash. And if you looked at that as a good indicator, you'd think, right, the market's got this under control. All we need is more of what we're already doing. But this is a huge placebo effect. This is a huge smokescreen, because as we know, if we look at the science and if we look at the way, the climate is responding to industrialized society's behavior, we are very much in trouble, and we are very much headed in the wrong direction. So the market is saying one thing, the climate is saying the other, and one of those is lying, and it's not the climate. So when we remove this smokescreen of greenwashing, whichever sector that's in, fashion sector, plastic sector, the food sector, we can actually see the wood for the trees. We can actually see which of the companies who are properly able to substantiate their claims, which are the solutions and the levers that we need to be pulling on right now, and like who should be involved in those kind of processes, rather than, you know, everybody just lying with impunity in their marketing. So I talked about greenwash.com. The purpose of greenwash.com is to profile a bunch of examples of greenwashing in the wild from across the fashion, plastics, and food sectors, so that you can learn how to spot it and how to call it out. And we can profile some of the companies that we're most frustrated by for their greenwashing. So here's just a couple. I won't go through them in detail, but here's just a couple from the plastic section of the website, which are maybe on the more difficult to spot end of the spectrum. So the first one is something that I've been very frustrated with recently, is seeing these like fake refill solutions. So kind of getting half on the refill bandwagon, but not all the way. You know, in replacing a single-use, maybe single-use PET bottle of hand soap with a very much unrecyclable, multi-layered sachet, which only covers maybe 1.5 to 2 refills, and then calling it refill, covering it with eco logos, marks, and green and things like that, to really mislead us into thinking that that's the better thing to do without going all the way that they should. This next one is Operation Clean Sweep, is a kind of industry-wide approach from the plastics industry around cleaning up nurdles, which are the precursor products to plastics, but not actually. It's not actually enforced. It's not actually mandatory, even though they say it's mandatory. And there's just a whole load of kind of little loopholes and issues in there that make it just a front, just a screen for actual just continued business as usual. And then the third one, this one was quite interesting because we got quite some media coverage for it. And it was funny to see my name alongside Kim Kardashian's, because this is Skims, which is Kim Kardashian's clothing brand, and for her underwear brand. And they were using compostable packaging for a lot of their products. And we called this out. And this was the thing that The Guardian picked up on, and a couple of others picked up on. But yeah, compostable packaging, major greenwashing potential in there for a variety of reasons, but feel free to explore greenwash.com to find out more. So yeah, Shimona was talking about the FTC's green guides being updated. There's a lot of movement going on, and the crackdown against greenwashing from a regulatory level. So in the EU, the Green Claims Directive was announced just a couple of weeks ago, and that's kind of going through the motions over the next couple of years. And then the Competition and Markets Authority have their Green Claims Guide, which came out a couple of years ago. But they are also looking at updating their existing consumer law to make it better at tackling green claims. So really, as this graphic represents, the regulatory sharks are circling, and not before time. It is absolutely crucial that we regulate greenwashing and green claims. So as I said before, we can clear that smoke screen, and we can see actually what are the solutions that we need to be pressing forward with, and what is just greenwash. That's me.
Great. Thank you so much, George. I highly recommend folks to check out greenwash.com, and Changing Markets always has such cutting edge reports that should really be bookmarked. So thank you, everybody. We do have a few minutes for questions, maybe 1 or 2. So I will kick off with one right now. And that is, how do we urge companies to stop greenwashing? Is consumer awareness and boycotting enough? And I think I want to have Shimona take a stab first.
Yeah, I can start. I think that one major way to do it is for us to support organizations that are doing the work to hold companies accountable. As I think a number of people have mentioned in the chat, corporations hold a lot of power. We need to bring our collective power to bear against them, and whether that is through lawsuits or through brand audit work, communications, through reports, media. There are so many ways that we can harness the power of our collective voice. And all of the organizations that are, on this webinar right now are avenues to do that. Other opportunities are class action lawsuits. Those have, they can be a very powerful tool. And with respect to greenwashing, there are a lot of plaintiffs' firms that are interested in that kind of work. The Keurig case that I mentioned is a good example of a class action that, because they were able to be certified as a class, the case settled and there were changes made to the marketing claims. So those are some that come to mind, but others feel free to jump in.
Thanks. George, Emma, reflections? Otherwise, I have a couple good ones here.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of existing there is existing consumer law out there, and a lot of the stuff that the EU is doing or the UK is doing is just like adding a bit more to be clear that the green claims are part of that. So not only is there consumer law, but there's also self-regulatory bodies like the Competition and Markets Authority, like the European Advertising Standards Authority. I was on a panel with them just yesterday in Sweden, talking about how they say that 60% of the cases that get reported to them are actually upheld as being greenwashing. So it's a really strong tool that people can pull on to report misleading advertising or misleading marketing to their competent authority, whether or not that has green claims as a specific part of it.
And I'll just quickly add, I personally feel like the media industry is aiding and abetting greenwashing in many instances, because we see many journalists and publications just accepting press releases and publishing those without further interrogation. Yeah. So we really need to see journalists being educated to step up, to take themselves, to hold those companies responsible, to look beyond press releases, to understand what's actually going on there. The same with consumers. There's a whole, host of information out in the world on real solutions, on the damages that these different greenwashing systems are causing. So we all individually have a responsibility to hold those companies accountable and not give them our money.
This is a good follow-up question to that, Emma. Has anyone considered suing the advertising agencies? They are creating these misleading ads.
I have not heard of anybody taking that avenue, and I have to think about what the cause of action would be, because under the consumer protection laws here in the U.S., it's the company, even though they are contracting with an advertising agency to make the statement, it's the company's statement. They're the one that owns it. And so I'm struggling in this moment to figure out how you would get to the agencies. But that's not to say it's not possible. I just would, some creative thinking needs to come to bear.
Yeah, I think that, so there's a couple of groups that I'm aware of. So I'm on the advisory board of one called the Conscious Advertising Network, which is about working with the advertisers, working with the agencies to ensure that they are sufficiently supported to not be taking on those kind of clients. And then there's another one called Clean Creatives, and this is more around like fossil fuel advertising, but creating a kind of a big group of agencies that will not take on oil and gas clients, for example. And hopefully to be included in that would be plastic and other types of greenwashing as well. I think it's an education thing as well. Whether or not you could sue them, they need to be educated to kind of on their radar is greenwashing, so they're not making greenwashed ads. Because I'm sure a lot of it comes from the creatives in the ad agencies being like, yeah, fantastic, green, and they just take it on the word of the company, and then they fly down some hole somewhere of creating a hugely overstated advertising campaign.
Emma, final thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know about suing, but I think it's a wonderful opportunity for campaigning. If there's any groups out there that fancy targeting those advertising agencies that are, perpetuating these greenwashings, I think it'd be fairly easy to pressure them just a little bit in a fun and creative way to get them to stop taking on those clients.
So there is Fossil Free Media, which is run by Jamie Henn. He is formerly of 350.org, fantastic colleague of ours. He's doing some really good work in that space. You can check out Fossil Free Media. We actually are out of time for questions. So thank you to our panelists, Emma, Shimona, and George, for joining us today, especially to Emma and George. It's quite late where they live. Thank you so much for the rich, useful, and valuable conversation. And I'll turn it over to Deanna.
Thank you, Shilpi. And thank you to all of our panelists again. I'll just restate, thank you, Emma, thank you, Shimona, and thank you, George. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you providing so much useful information and such a rich, valuable conversation. And I know, I wish we had another hour right now to really get into it, but it's a complex issue. So I really appreciate all of your expertise. I'd like to just say that Shilpi, big thank you to you for facilitating such a great conversation with our panel, and encourage everyone to please mark your calendars for a very special webinar coming up on June 22nd. We're taking the month of May off for webinars, but we'll be back June 22nd with Plastic-Free Seas, diving into how plastic impacts health, climate, and our oceans, featuring Her Deepness, Dr. Sylvia Earle. And if you haven't already, we invite you to join our global coalition, Plastic Pollution Coalition. It's currently free to join. You can join as an individual, a business, or a nonprofit organization. We also invite you to connect with us on social media to learn more about our work. And we will also be sending out a follow-up survey and appreciate your feedback to help us to continue to improve these webinars. We will also try to answer questions we did not get to today in a future blog, so please keep an eye out for that. And I want to thank everyone again for joining. Thanks also to our Plastic Pollution Coalition member groups and partners who shared the webinar with their communities and networks. We look forward very much to seeing you at our next webinar on June 22nd, and see you soon. Take care.